While Mr. Cunningham leads in prayer and pledge, please stand.
Let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity tonight, Lord, to be able to vote on the items that affect our school and our corporation, most importantly, the kids that we serve, Lord. We ask you to guide our hands tonight, give us your wisdom, give us your direction. Also, Lord, be with the servicemen and women that we have overseas that are protecting us, risking our lives, keeping us safe, Lord. We ask you to watch over and protect them, bring them back safely to us, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Cunningham.
You're most welcome, sir.
Okay. Item 65, minutes and public work session.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cunningham.
make a motion to approve the minutes and also the public works section minutes as presented.
Okay, got a motion, need a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second, we got a motion, it's Mr. Cunningham, second by Mr. Herrera. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same, okay, motion carries. Item 66, homework policy, Mr. McKenzie.
Yes, we placed in the board's packet for this meeting a homework policy that we worked on with the administrative team. We felt there needed to be some changes to that homework policy in light of the grading policy that we developed last year and the board approved of last spring. And then we took our ideas to the Mississinewa Teachers Association. We had discussion with them, and we came to the policy that we provided you with represents a consensus of views with the teachers and administrators. So I know the board hasn't had this very long, so if you want more time to think about it, review it before you would take a vote, be comfortable with the vote, that's fine. But I did want to get it in your hands at this point, and we're open to any questions or discussion you might want to have at this point in time.
What's the board's pleasure? Yes.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'd like to have a little more time to look at it and read it very carefully.
That's fine. I just might add that, and I made a note of this in your briefs, that most of the verbiage in this policy is representative in the old policy that has existed for 25, 30 years. The only change that has any significance, in my view, would be item E, and that correlates with the grade policy that you approved of last year and last spring. The added statement is the bullet at the end, which I don't know that anybody can take exception to. I don't know who would argue with that. Certainly the teachers group did not argue with that. E represents a compromise between the teachers and the administrative team that we all felt good about. So it's flexible in our opinion, in our judgment. So if the board would prefer to table this, that's fine.
I'd like to ask you a question, if I might.
You sure can, Mr. Crouch.
Would you explain how, about the third line down there in E, if a teacher has an excessive number of failing grades, that's one of the questions. What is that exactly? As determined by the building principal, according to the school grading policy, then the principal has the authority to adjust the percentage of the teacher's homework grades. How would that work? How would that play out?
Well, it would be easier for me to answer that question by just reading E and explaining it line by line, if you will.
Sounds good.
Okay.
At the discretion of the classroom teacher, homework grades may range from 0 to 30% of the overall student grade for a grading period. In other words, homework will not consist of more than 30% of a student's overall grade for a grading period. However, it could be less than that at the teacher's discretion. It could be zero. In other words, a teacher may not use homework grades in any way in determining the overall grade for a student. If a teacher has an excessive number of failing grades, which that is double digits. If you're failing 10% or more of your kids in a grading period, there's going to be conversations that start. And eventually, if there's interventions that we are going to expect that teacher to implement in order to create a context and situation where more students are passing the class. And after 2 or 3 grading periods, then the principal is going to maybe look at adjusting what that homework percentage is. If we adjust it down and more students are passing the course, then that's what the principal might do. Hopefully the teacher takes that idea and suggestion on their own to make that adjustment. It might be a case where we adjust it up closer to 30%. Maybe the teacher was only counting at 10%, and if you adjust it up to 25%, then more of the students are passing the class. Your grading policy that you approved states that if a teacher is failing an excessive amount of students, the principal has the discretion to alter the grade. So this is in line with the policy that this school board passed last spring.
I remember discussing that. Now, I wonder about this, you gave a percentage there of 10%.
Right.
You know, where did that come from?
That's just an arbitrary number because we're stating in here that teachers have the discretion of determining homework constituting the overall grade for anywhere from 0 to 30. So in my example, I used 10, that let's say the teacher has determined that 10% of the overall grade is going to be homework, and yet they're failing an excessive amount of kids for whatever reasons. I can think of a number of reasons that might be happening. And we look at the homework grades, and they're pretty good. And if we counted the homework grade at 25% instead of 10, then we have a lot more students passing the course than what we currently have at whatever arbitrary amount's been set.
I must have misunderstood
That
you.
scale can slide up or down in working with that teacher that's having problems with failing too many students.
I'm pretty sure I misunderstood you. The 10% I was talking about was 10% of the students. What is an excessive number of failures? That's what I was taught. I thought you said that was 10%.
I said a double-digit failure rate, we're gonna start working with the teacher. If they have double-digit failures overall, they have 100 kids and 10 of them are failing, then we're gonna start working with that teacher to make sure they're doing everything that's possible. We have a series of several interventions that we're gonna start implementing with that teacher to try to create more students having more success in the class. We're not saying that all students have to get A's and B's. We're just saying we want a low rate of students that are failing.
So do we. I'm still not sure about that.
Are
I
you
mean,
sure it's the
we-
definition of excessive?
I'm questioning excessive, yes.
Do you want to put a quantifier in there?
Well, I would guess, I don't know, I don't know if you can really qualify that. But if we've been in the classroom very long, some classes, pretty darn good. Some classes, wow.
Here's another way to think about it. if we have a 90% rate of kids that are graduating, we're not gonna be in a school.
Yeah, I know what you're shooting for. I'm just trying to live realistically. I'm just wondering, are you gonna, is this at all gonna push teachers to give more credit where credit isn't really achieved?
I'm guessing that people that have this issue, which we do not have very many teachers that have this issue. And we're not saying that we're gonna start changing grades immediately. I'm saying that if they have double-digit failure rates, we're gonna red flag that teacher and we're gonna start working with them closely. There's a lot of things that teachers can do in terms of communication, providing extra time, bringing parents in, that if you're failing 10% or we've had as high as 45% of teachers failing students, that can be done to try to create a context where more students are having success.
But if a teacher's got, say, 15% Fs, that doesn't mean it all comes from homework. Why are you zeroing, I mean, it could be poor test grade.
No, when we work with teachers, it's a lot more than homework we're working on.
I know, but you're kind of,
But this is the homework policy
yes,
that supports that. It's just one piece of the puzzle.
it just seems like we just, of course, you know, I was a teacher. Put all the
No.
responsibility on the teacher and none on the kid.
I don't interpret it that way.
Well, if we're not ready, then we can wait. Can we, it's not a big. it's
Well,
not
of
so-
course.
Yeah, unless someone wants to, would you like to table this for the next meeting or something like that? Is that what's the board's pleasure?
That's what I'd like to do.
I want you to know, Mrs. Freitas, that the teachers did not object to this.
Anybody
They
else
supported this.
on the board want to comment or ask questions? Again,
Well, I guess a couple questions I had. One, when you say when you look at it and you say that's the homework thing for the class. So if you're gonna raise it or lower, it's for the whole class, it's not for individuals, right?
That was my other question, yeah.
You
Sorry,
need-
Terry, I took
You
your
need to
question.
define your question again. for
Okay,
me to
so
clarify
you're,
it. I'm
so,
not sure what-
student A, B, and C. A student that's in that class, we decide their homework is gonna be, is gonna constitute
No,
10%
this would
of
be
their
for the
grade.
whole class.
All right, so it's
Okay.
not, and then the other thing is the likelihood of a student failing, what's the likelihood that they're gonna be doing the homework? Because my experience has always been is that usually if a kid's failing, he's not doing the homework, and that's why he's failing, so.
And that's why we make the statement up above, that the goal of homework and classwork is to improve a student's grade, and it's also to be used to assess the learning progress of students. But we also state in there that we prefer classwork to homework because teachers
Okay.
are right there on the spot to assess and to evaluate, and we know for certain that that student is doing that work and not somebody else.
So I think that's why I think that's the difficulty that I'm having with it, is that I'm looking at this holistically, and it's just a homework policy. I think that's I'm looking at it and we're defining it as homework, but there's so many other things that come into play for that's not in here. I mean, I think you're trying to do a good job explaining it, it's just homework, where I'm looking at it as all the other things that would be involved, so I guess that's where I'm struggling.
I feel like that there needed to be a discussion about homework. There's lots of opinions about homework among teachers and how it's used and how much it constitutes as part of a grade. It varies quite a bit, and I think everybody that's been in school on the board knows that because you experienced it in your own school experience, educational experience as a student, that some teachers did very little homework, some teachers did lots of homework, some teachers counted it as 50% of the grade, some teachers counted it as 10% of the grade, and there needs to be some definition and uniformity. And I really feel like the teachers and the administration struck a middle ground with this policy that all of us could live with. It's not, if I were running my classroom, I wouldn't count 30% of the grade as homework. I probably would do very little homework. That's my educational philosophy. But there's some teachers that rely a lot on homework. I know that some of you might be thinking, well, what about math? But I sat in on 2 trainings for AP Calculus from Notre Dame when they came down and trained our people in AP. And that teacher, who had had a lot of success in standardized test scores and AP Calculus scores, declared that we shouldn't be doing homework in calculus. And he explained how his classroom was run and orchestrated, and he had lots of success. Now, does that mean we have calculus teachers or math teachers that don't use homework? No. I'm just trying to state to you, there is a lot of range in opinions. And some of the people that think homework should be a minimal part of the school experience, there's some of those people who have had a lot of success on standardized test results. And there's probably people that rely a lot on homework that have had success in standardized test results. The beginning of the conversation with the teachers was something like this: let everybody do what they want, and if somebody has a problem, then you deal with that individual. Well, the problem with that is that if we arbitrarily start to implement strategies, and part of that is to address homework, and we just implement what we think should happen as an administrative team, and that teacher doesn't like it, they're going to go straight to the MTA, and the MTA is going to say, where did you get those ideas? Why do you think those ideas are right? So that's why you got to have a policy up front before you start dealing with people that have problems with using homework incorrectly or are failing too many students.
Okay, Mr. McKenzie's presented it. Are there any more questions? If not, we can table it. We can, make a motion, or
Did Terry make a motion?
she?
No,
Did you
I
want?
said I would like to table it, but I didn't make a motion.
Would you like to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion that we table this.
Okay, we got a motion. And a second.
I'll second it.
Second. Any more questions? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. We'll just revisit it, okay?
Sure.
I don't mean I'm against it so much as I just want to think about it some more.
Sure. I realize that. That's why I stated that in your briefs, that
Okay,
we certainly understand
Yeah.
you wanting more time. Would you want a public work session on this, or you just want to discuss it more
like a
the next
teacher's
meeting? How do you want to, how can we help you come to a decision?
I think just more discussion for me. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I think a public work session is a good thing. I like the discussion.
Okay.
I like the discussion among the 7 of us as to how we feel about it. And either way, so we have I made a second.
Okay.
We voted, it's carried, so we'll
Yeah.
table it. You can set up one for us,
Okay.
Mr. Kinsey.
I just want to leave you with this thought. This is not an administrative proposal. This is an administrative Mississinewa Teachers Association proposal. This wasn't done in isolation by the administrators.
Do you know if each teacher has seen it? Or was that just the leadership?
Just the people, the leadership.
Okay.
Well, we've just been tabled, we're gonna move on.
Good.
and you'll take care of getting a
Sure.
workshop together for us. Appreciate that. Item 67, permission to void 2-year outstanding checks.
I'll take that. Indiana code asks that we receipt back into our books any checks that is outstanding as of 2 years on December 31st. So that would be December 31st of 2016. The first set of checks is on the extracurricular accounting side, and the last 2 checks are on the corporation side. So I'm asking permission tonight to receipt those checks back in. If you have any individual questions on any checks, I would ask that you refer to the check number or date rather than call out the name. But I would ask permission to receipt those checks back into our books, please.
What's the board's pleasure?
I don't have a question about like the individual checks, but just policy-wise. So like if you write something out of a grant that you have from that part of it, how do you receipt that back into the same grant year or the?
No, I can't do that if the grant's closed. However, what we try to do is follow up on those checks. So if we see a check is not being
Okay.
cashed, we're gonna follow up.
Okay.
This list is longer on the extracurricular accounting side because I didn't ask the ECA treasurer last year to do that. I must have missed that, so this list is longer on the ECA side. But you'll notice it's shorter on the corporation side, and I've asked our treasurers to be in contact with people that, the vendors so much they can't do. There's a couple of vendors in here that it's hard to follow up on why they aren't cashing a check. Employees, it's a lot easier. People that run the gates or officials, we can call and say, hey, you've got checks out there you need to be cashing, or if it's lost, we can reissue it in a timely manner. Now, it's not so timely with some of these checks up here to do that. But to answer your question, if it's a grant that's closed, we would receipt it back to the general fund,
Okay.
probably.
Okay.
Or education fund, yeah.
Jill, I had that same question when I looked through there. A couple of these checks up here in the extracurricular are somewhat sizable,
Yes,
and you have made an attempt through those 2 years to get a hold of these people and say, hey,
yes, we have. Now, a couple of these are employees. And one in particular has a bad habit of not cashing checks. And there's actually still some outstanding that are 6 or 7 months old. And we have made contact with her to try to get her to cash those checks or find out if they're lost so we can reissue and not have this problem. So this list is a little too long for my happiness. But we do try to, contact people that we can and let them know that it's still lingering. Because we have to keep carrying it over month after month too.
Yep.
It's not like, it's not a burden to the books too. So plus that's money that's not in our accounts that we can be spending elsewhere.
Any other questions?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Cunningham.
I'll make a motion to grant permission to void the 2-year-old outstanding checks as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion made by Mr. Cunningham, second by Mr. Freitas. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Personnel, 68, Mr. McKinney.
Yes, we have the following personnel items for the board's consideration this evening. James Reed has resigned as the boys' head golf coach for Mississinewa High School effective immediately. Debbie Durr will retire as a 5th grade teacher at Northview Elementary effective at the end of this school year. Brandy Perry has requested a leave of absence beginning April 5th through the end of the 2018-19 school year. Carolyn Ty will retire as a cafeteria worker at Mississinewa High School effective March 8th. She will have served 13 and a half years in that post. Carolyn Arms has requested a 1-year leave of absence beginning March 7th of this school year. We also have the following recommendations to present to you this evening. Anna McGuire to be hired as the varsity assistant girls tennis coach at Mississinewa High School effective immediately. Summer Niverson to be hired as a volunteer girls tennis coach at Mississinewa High School effective immediately. Taylor Mavronicles to be hired as a volunteer softball coach at Mississinewa High School effective immediately. Jared Reel, currently the high school soccer coach for the boys, is to be hired as the middle school soccer coach effective immediately. Todd Spencer and Darren Silty to be hired as volunteer middle school soccer coaches, effective immediately. And we would recommend approval of these personnel items as presented this evening.
And what's the board's pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miller,
I'll make a motion that we approve the personnel report as presented.
need a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Freitas. Okay, so we got a motion made by Mrs. Miller and second by Mrs. Freitas. Are there any questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Item 69, conference request. Mr. McKenzie.
Yes, we have the following conference request for your consideration this evening, and that is Liz Strong to attend the Indiana National Association for the Education of Young Children Early Learning Conference in Indianapolis on Friday, March 15th, at a cost of $1,672 to be paid from the readiness account. And we would recommend approval of this conference request as presented.
Okay, board's pleasure.
Mr. President,
Mr. Smith,
motion that we approve the conference requests as presented.
second, anybody?
I'll second.
Mr. Herrera. You've got a motion made and seconded. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. 70, facility reports. Mr. McKenzie.
Yes, Mr. Gosser isn't here this evening, but my understanding was he didn't have anything to bring to you this evening. I do know that he's working diligently on these estimates to get them solidified and get them as accurate as possible. We're hoping that sometime in the April meeting to share some of those estimates that have come in with you. But at this time, we have nothing to share on
Can I
facilities.
share
Go
one
ahead.
thing, that he did issue a purchase order this week for the 2 buses that was approved during budget time. So the purchase order will be going out for 2 new buses.
Nothing else then on that? Item 71, legislative update. Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. President. So last Tuesday, well, it'd been the 19th, I had the opportunity to go down to the legislative forum. And those were all the legislative liaisons for all the corporations in the state. There was probably about 60%, 70% attendance of those liaisons. Had an opportunity to listen to the House and Senate leadership talk about the priority for school funding. And then also had an opportunity to meet individually with our representative, and Kevin Mahan showed up, and actually at our table, they divided us into districts, and Kevin was the only one that showed up from all the other districts that had different representatives. So we had an opportunity to be able to talk with him about education and what's going on in Indiana. So that was a great opportunity, I think, for us to highlight the needs in education, but also, I think, to be able to talk about individual things in our corporation. So that was a good meeting. Pam was nice enough to drop some information into Google Drive if you want to look at that. The House third readings have ended from the House, and now everything's moved over to the Senate. House Bill 1001, which is the budget, has now left the House's hands and is in the Senate, and they've just began first readings. I watched some of that today. The legislative priorities of the House are focused in on education and funding for DCS, and so I sent that out to you to email today because it's a PowerPoint. I didn't know how well that would download on Google Drive, but they are looking at increasing funding for education significantly, looking at increases. Matter of fact, they are saying that the most dollars that's ever been spent for K-12 tuition support, it's $1.13 billion increase in annual funding since fiscal year 2012, and it's a 17.8 increase in annual funding since 2012 as well. There's some individual things that I emailed you that you're going to want to look at, but It's talking about raising the amount of, in just about every area for funding. Fiscal year 19 appropriation from 7.16 billion to 2020 to 7.31 billion. So a 2.1% increase for 19 and a 2.2% increase for fiscal year 2020. So also looking at funding for increasing the amount in the preschool grant, and then also the amount that's also for individuals per student for that as well. So there's a lot of information in there if you get a chance to look at it. But pretty happy with it, considering 2 years ago corrections took a lot of the money and spending, but big funding, DCS, Child Services, and Education are the two big areas that they focused on. Of course, none of this is finalized. It goes over to the Senate, and they'll get the opportunity to kick that around a little bit. We're past the midway point, so I would say here probably next meeting I'll kind of know where the Senate is going to stand and where they're going to come out. But I answer any questions you might have. I mean, really, when you look at it, 50% of the general fund appropriations are to education. And the next highest after that 50% is Medicaid, which is like at 15%, and higher education, college, and that is at 12%. The rest is the rest of the general fund for the state. So answer any questions you have. I could talk about this a lot longer, but you guys want to get to bed, so it's exciting stuff.
Any questions from Mr. Cunningham? Chris, nice job. Appreciate you going down and representing the school.
Thanks. It was really nice, and we got a lot of kudos for. I talked to Mr. Mahan, and he said that in all the years that he's been doing this, that our corporation has been the only one that's had a legislative person contact him and then put the time in to be able to send him stuff or call him and ask him about he says he gets calls from superintendents, which he said he would expect to get from. So he will listen to what. So it's not just me. I mean, if any of you want to email him or talk to him, he's happy to do that about anything related to education. So
Don't worry, Chris, we're not gonna take your job away from you.
it's all right.
Sure, sure. I don't think anybody's watching.
Mr. President, this is an appointed position, not an elected
I
position,
know.
so you can change that anytime you want.
No, sir. I don't think there's anybody messing for it.
I will second that about Kevin Mahan, though. He is very accessible and attempts to reach out to all of the constituency groups that he represents, and especially educators, well, at least that's what I observe. Jill and I have talked about this recently. It's probably the best financial year for our school district, given our circumstances, probably in a decade. But you have to, there's other things, I don't mean to be Dougie Downer, but in 2009, at the time of the Great Recession, we lost a $350,000. And that has never been put back in the piggy bank. And TIF, that's another conversation for another day, but that costs Mississinewa Community Schools about $250,000 every year. And so, given the fact that we're in a period of declining enrollment, this is great news for
Yeah,
us.
and they talked about the TIF District 2 tab about getting representation, having representation from corporations on there
Right.
to keep
And-
that from.
And we appreciate that, a voting representation.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But when they say we're getting 2.1 one year and 2.2, that's if you're not losing students.
That's true.
If you're not losing students, you're not getting 2.1 or 2.2. Just saying.
Okay, anything else from the board? Okay, item 72, corporate sponsors, donations, grants. Mr. McKenzie.
Yes, to the After Prom from Fairmount Round Robins in the amount of $500. And the other donation is to the After Prom from State Farm and Dennis Roach in the amount of $100. And we would recommend the board approve these donations as presented.
What's the board's pleasure? Anybody?
Mr. President,
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
move to approve the sponsors and donations as presented.
Okay, got a motion, need a second?
I'll second.
We got a second by Ms. Miller. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, claims, items 73. Ms. Townsend.
I'm presenting claims tonight totaling $1,240,945.25 for your approval, please.
Give the board a few, to ask questions, a few seconds there. We've all had it long enough. Is there anything stands out that you want to ask about? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Ms. Freitas.
I move that we, pay our bills, accept these claims.
Okay. Got a motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Crouch? Yep. Okay. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Correspondence and other business. Thanks for putting on the same page. I missed it last meeting.
Turn it over.
I had turned it over, so, Mr. McKenzie.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to recognize our winter sports season. We had, our wrestling team didn't have a great team record, but we had 3 wrestlers that went to the semi-state this year, and we had several wrestlers that had really good seasons. Our basketball teams, girls and boys, had winning seasons, and we will miss the seniors that are going to be moving on after these seasons were over. But we have a lot of returning players and athletes that I think our winter sports teams will be very competitive next year. A reminder that our next board meeting is March 18th, 2 weeks from tonight. And the ISBA Fall State Conference is coming up this fall. And so we listed the dates for you in your notes, September 29th through October 1st. We would plan to leave the central office around 3:30 in the afternoon on that Sunday, and would leave the conference sometime around noon. Sometimes we've left right before lunch, sometimes after lunch, whatever the group desires when we get to that point. But if you're planning on attending the state ISBA conference, let us know as soon as you know that. So we've already reserved the rooms, and we can cancel those up close to the time of the conference, but it's not time really to start enrolling in the conference, so you've got time, but just wanted to encourage you to start looking at your calendars and making those plans and thinking about that. So once you make that judgment, please let Mrs. Wilson know, and she'll let me know, and Mrs. Winter know. So that's all I have. Mrs. Townsend, Mrs. Winter, you have anything?
Well, we do have Coach Real in the audience tonight, and I believe Coach Spencer, we approved tonight, just in case you didn't know who that was.
Anything from the board?
Thank you.
I just wanted to, I think it was Mr. McKenzie that gave us the list of all the 50 states and how the budgets were in 2008 or 9 and how they were in 2018.
I don't remember giving you a list, but I talked about that the last time we met.
Whoever sent it to us, it was very interesting, and I appreciated getting it. I like to get stuff like that.
Me,
Yeah,
it's me.
I thought,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
you
thank you.
sent that recently.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well,
That was the editorial, or?
No, it was a chart tab.
Okay.
It showed all the different states and funding and different things like that, so.
Some states had gone up in per student spending,
Right.
but we had gone down several $1,000s in Indiana per student.
Yeah,
Anyone
I think
else?
that happened right around 2010, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When we made all those, as a state, made those cuts after the
Yes.
recession. Yeah. And property tax caps, yeah.
Anyone else? I have some, but I got the opportunity to go to the Mermaid the little, that was probably, the Friday night show and the Saturday night show both sold out. And they got in a matinee to get in, and we were fortunate enough to, as winners, to find out that there was one, and we got over there. I think it was about half full. I think they told me it said about, it's either about 172, but they had more than that standing room only, and it was well worth the money to see it. My daughter went and my wife, and it was really a great job. And what's the first thing I got asked, Terry?
When are we gonna get our auditorium?
That's what I got too.
Yeah, and I think there's some ways out there maybe we can do, because that's not a very big thing, and I got some thoughts, and I'd like to share later on with, I don't think we can, I know we can't afford $12 million, but I think there is something out there, but it's sad to have to go to the kind of places and, you know, and have, carry things and get things together, and if there was a basketball team or something, we wouldn't put up, so the fine arts need something, we gotta do something, so we need to look on that, that's just my point of view, so, anybody else got anything?
I'll echo what you said.
So, anyway, so, okay, anybody, anyone else? All right, it looks like we're at 75, everybody's favorite thing that's next to recess is adjournment. Anybody?
So moved.
So I got a motion by Mr. Crouch,
Second.
a second by Mrs. Miller. Are there any